privilege and joy, honor, humility that we welcome for the very first time to the summit as a speaker. The talented, the beautiful, the amazing, the smile that can cut through any cloud that will climb with you to the top. Raquel Soto. With that being said, this summit is yours.
Thank you so much. I was just like, oh my gosh, that was a beautiful introduction. So I'm gonna hear that again with my heart sinking. I'm like, I don't know if I should be doing any of this stuff anymore. Because we all have those moments, right? I had this plan of what I wanted to share with you, and then that went out the window as I was listening to Doug and listening to Lisa. I was writing so many notes from what he was sharing and some of the things that Lisa was sharing. And if we get to it, if I have time, I will share it at the end. But I wanted to weave some of the things that he was saying. For those of you who are new to me, my specialty is amplifying visibility, but it's also in identity rewiring. So I talk about, a lot about like neuroscience and epigenetics, emotional regulation, and biblical principles and how they all weave together. And like Doug, the reason I started this journey is we both had a rooftop experience. And it's interesting because like Doug and I were friends, like you know how you like friends of friends, and then you're like, oh, they look cool. I'll just go ahead and accept them. But we've never had a conversation. And then a mutual friend of ours, he reintroduced me to Doug, and he's like, oh, do you know Doug? And I was just like, wait, he's on my friends list. I know his name. And then he's like, you have a similar story. And so I wanted to weave in some of the things he was talking about um, through the lens of what I do and how I help people as well. Because it wasn't, I tried to take my own life 4 different times. And it wasn't until the fourth time where I was having that rooftop experience where I was like, okay, I need to know what's happening in my body. And it's like what Lisa was talking about when she said, how do you live when love almost costs you your life? And that's exactly what's happening in the marriage my first marriage. I always say first marriage because at first husband, at some point, I'll probably be married again. He passed away in 2020. And so even though at the time of his passing, we were separated, I was still his family. I was his best friend. I was still helping take care of him. We were co-parenting together. And it's complicated when somebody has both the sides of extreme light, and because he was so broken, I was getting cut in his brokenness. I was very young when I married him, and then it turned out that the doctor told it again, said he probably has like borderline bipolar. And so for anybody who's lived with somebody like that, I didn't know. I was always on eggshells. So it was like it was never enough. And so still unpacking some of those lies that I was led to believe, that even though I was having all these awards and I was doing all these things, nothing I did was good enough. And I didn't know who I was walking, who I was walking into when I came home from work. I didn't know if it was going to be the one that I fell in love with or the broken part of him that was going to cut me that day. And I will say this now that I have not said publicly before. When Lisa was talking about being strangled toward the end, him and I were in the kitchen, and we were talking about the separation, and it got a little heated, and I was sitting down, and he was the kind of person some people have really strong hands, and he put his hands around my throat and started to squeeze. And it just took 2 or 3 seconds before he stopped squeezing. But I had lost my voice in those 2 and 3 seconds, literally. And I lied about it afterwards. I told people I had laryngitis. I wore a scarf around my neck for a few days until my voice got back. And I think when I was listening to Lisa, it occurred to me while she was sharing her story and even taking us through that exercise that maybe that's why I'm so obsessed with having people tell their stories, or having it outlive them. She made in that exercise, it helped me to realize that I lost my voice in that marriage, and then I physically lost it toward the end. And now that's what I love to do, is that helping people to amplify their voices again and to have their work outlive them because he was brilliant. He was the most gifted artist and musician I have ever known, I have ever met, and really throughout time. He would play a couple of, the closest thing I can tell you what he sounded like was like Santana, the the guitarist, and like Gypsy Kings flamenco, and he would do like just a couple of notes, and literally when we'd be outside, people would just come and sit at his feet, and he would just be playing a couple chords, and it was like a Pied Piper. People would just swarm to him. People would come over to our place because he was also a fine artist. And they wouldn't even come to visit us. They're like, oh, we just came to visit the paintings. It's like, would you like some coffee while you're in our home museum, I guess? But that is the kind of talent that he had that even like a couple strokes, people would just be mesmerized. And at the same time, he was so wounded. And later on, I started to recognize some things and understand why he had his best friends, all of them except for me, died in his arms. He grew up in a very um, rough neighborhood, and so the guys would band together. I'm like, Hector, that was a gang. He's like, it wasn't a gang, it was a club, dude. It was a gang. He was the head of them, but it was for protection. And all his friends, all his best friends, died a bloody mess in his arms, and having that woundedness, not really being recognized for his genius, going through a very painful divorce where he gave up everything right when he started to become like the Hector Soto in Chicago, being known for his art. He gave up everything for his family, moved to another state to support his wife's dream of being a nurse, and then that blew up 9 months later. So he had all this pain, and he was older than I was, and I was in my 20s when I married him, early 20s when I married him. And back then it wasn't, I'm Latina, I'm Puerto Rican. And so in our culture back then, it wasn't, you don't go to a therapist. Right? Your problems, you say you leave that in the house. And we just try to help each other, and you don't go and get help because that's not what we do. We don't talk about those things. And because I didn't talk about it, it's like when we don't have these spaces to talk about it, then I have a friend of mine, Emilio. He says, shared pain is less pain. And when we are sharing our stories, it does give other people the freedom to share theirs as well. Like I've never said out loud or to anybody really the fact that he choked me and I lost my voice physically because I was embarrassed and I was filled with shame. But this is the first time I'm sharing it because people need to know that even though we look strong, you need to check in on the strong ones. Nobody checked in on me. And I just started talking about the story in the last year or so of trying to take my life for different times. And after the fourth one, because I'm not always the sharpest tool in the shed, I was like, what is going on in my head? That I think this is okay. That I thought that me leaving my three children and my sister and my parents behind. And it was the kindness of God that showed me a vision right before I was going to take my life. Like he said, turn around, look at them. And I saw the pain in their faces. He's like, if you jump, you'll be with me. You'll be fine. But they will never recover. They will not be able to move on with their life. They won't be able to work out. And I was like, oh. And I stayed for them. And I was like, you need to tell me what's happening. And this is all the things that I started to learn. First, he took me to some light reading and quantum physics. I was like, oh, I see that. And then it was like epigenetics. And I'm like, oh, now I understand more and more. But when you have people who are strong, nobody checks in on us because we're the life of the party. We're the ones who's always praying for people, nurturing them, kumbayaing, being there with them. We're not checked on ever. So then when I started sharing these stories, the people in my life were like, what do you mean? They had then grief because they didn't recognize how much pain I was in. And that was talked about here too. Like I was hiding it. We hide it. And we hide it because we don't want to give people a burden because we know how much pain we're in and how heavy it is on our life. And we don't want to share that. But we have to because that shared pain releases our burden. See, places like this are important because we're not trauma bonding here. There are a lot of places that speak around grief and other things, and they trauma bond. We're not trauma bonding here. We're sharing our experiences and giving you some practical things that you can do because this will save a life. It could save your life or will save somebody else's. And if we don't share our story when we're free to, called to, then we are not giving somebody else the opportunity to be free. Because there is a lot of, especially like depending on the culture, right? There could be a lot of shame and guilt over things that it's a false sense of shame. I was carrying around shame and guilt for things that were not my fault because of the story that I believed. And we're always living off our stories. People are like, I want to live my truth. Everybody lives their truth. The truth might be maybe crappy, but that's how our brain works. We're wired to succeed, to live out of our belief system. And our belief system is just a story. And if we're identifying as somebody who is always a certain thing, right? For me, it was like the identity of I can't is never enough. It's never enough. And like Doug was talking about when he was, hiding at work. Well, yeah, because there we get seen, we get our raises, we get our bonuses, we get the rah-rahs, we get the nice dopamine hits. And so we run to the place that is we feel is feeding us with some good juju because our brain is either our medicine man or a drug dealer. And for Doug and I, we have that similarity where we ran to work because that was our place, that was our drug of choice. Not because we were seeking attention, but because we were being recognized. We were free to be ourselves. We were free to share our talents and our gifts. And it wasn't a place for us to be like, oh, you can do a little bit more, or, you really suck at this. The more accolades we had, it was like, oh, very parasitic, feeding us. And then we would give more and more and more and more. And as anyone I've never been addicted to like other kinds of drugs, but that's still a drug because again, your brain is your medicine man, you're a drug dealer. People are like, oh, that person is like so dramatic, they're addicted to drama. Yes, that's the way our brains work. We get addicted to things. We are made almost in some ways for addiction. And so we have to find the good addictions. And for Doug and I, we found our addiction in work. And it worked until it didn't. And for me, that accumulated into the pressures of work. By the time I was toward the end, I was overseeing like 40 offices around the world. I was not showing up as a mother I wanted to because I was always, working 60 to 70 hours. When, we're sleeping over here, Asia's waking up. So even though we're talking about the presence, I was with my children physically, but I was not present with them. I lost a lot of my hair. Type 2 diabetes kicked in from the stress and all the pressure between work that was my place of addiction and then going home and not knowing what I was going to walk into and having to manage the family and the finances and all the things. I was always on. And I looked great. And people were like, "Oh, you look so great." I look like a crackhead. I was so scared. I was like, I look like a crackhead. I look like a bobblehead. And people were actually praising me for the way I looked. And I was like, I'm not eating. Literally, I was drinking like 3 pots of coffee and a 2 liter of soda every single day, killing my system to stay on. And I was like, wow, you get so many things done. Well, yeah, I was drugging myself with with all kinds of caffeine. I never did the other stuff, but that's exactly what I did. I was hurting and I was grieving, and the world was giving me awards for it. It was calling me a champion. I wish I was like you. And I'm looking at them like, no, you really don't. This is why these stories matter. Your stories matter. I was writing notes as Doug was talking. I want to yeah, the hustle. I loved when he said that, right? The hustle was a terrible grief counselor. Yeah, because nobody knew I was grieving. And even now, it's been almost 6 years and he's been gone, and I still have waves of anger. Grief, I tell people grief is not linear. The good book talks about how to mourn with those who mourn. Before it says, rejoice with those who rejoice. We like that, right? Because there's serotonin, there's oxytocin, we're bonding together. We love rejoicing with those who rejoice. But where you prove you love is mourning with those who mourn. Once you realize that they're mourning and allowing them that space. Because it's hard. I know somebody had told me not not too long ago, aren't you over that already? No, because I loved him. I still love him. He is the father of my children. I mourn that Angie would never have her father walk her down the aisle. And that's something that her and I talk about a few times a year. And she's like, I know my brothers will walk me down the aisle, but it's not the same. And if you get married before I get married, maybe you'll walk me down the aisle, but it's not the same. There's a death in that. My sons were young, 6 years ago, so my youngest would have been like 11 years old when his father died. His personality wasn't even finished cooking. My middle child is 22. His prefrontal cortex is not finished cooking. When he died, he there's a huge hole. Of course, I'm not over it. Only because we were separated at the time didn't mean that we weren't going to be in each other's lives. I still wanted those things that we had planned to happen for him. And so, yeah, those things come in waves. So, and there's the other side, right? When we are grieving so much that we lock everybody else out. The person who was coming to mind was somebody I knew, and her son had died. Her son had died, and um, it was malpractice, and she was so grief stricken that even though she had an adult daughter as well, she kind of ignored the daughter for years, destroyed that relationship because of the grief of her son trying to get justice for him. We need to be able to recognize that maybe you were seeking justice because something happened like that with malpractice. You're seeking justice for that person, or maybe they were killed and you're seeking justice. But also recognizing that we're not alone, looking around to the people who are wanting to be in our lives and love us and mourn with us and hold our hand through the process. And if things take longer, then they just take longer. Let's thing with Doug saying. Doug had a lot of golden nuggets. We was talking about, being stuck, and I was talking about a story. I loved his wit and T being thankful. What we hear about the RAS, a lot of people like to talk about the reticular activating system, and what people say is not incorrect, it's incomplete. Our reticular activating system goes to our physical eyeballs, and it's scanning, right? But it's only our external filter, not the internal one. Where is it getting the information from? Most of it from our brain, called the part of our brain called the default mode network, which is your internal filter. It's kind of like what it sounds like, a set point. So if you're wanting to have, you know, people help you and you're deciding, okay, this is not my story, this is not the end. I want some help around how do I process this out of my body? Because the body does keep score. And that's a decision that you make. Then your eyes will go and find the right person like Lisa. She can help you with that. She'll just, it'll feel like happenstance. It'll feel like magic. It's not, it's just, we're all frequency and music. And so our stories and the way we're framing our grief is going to help us to empower ourselves and others, or it can be very detrimental. And that's why this space means so much because we're able to share our stories. And I'm not going to walk away from saying that. It's like we need spaces like this where we're not trauma bonding and we're letting people know I came through this too, or I'm still going through it. And it's okay. It's 6 years later. I'm still, I'll see something and I'm like, oh, and I almost forget, like I want to text or call Hector. And I'm like, oh, well, you're probably seeing it from up there. I would love to share that with you. The thing with thankfulness is that our brain, once we start to choose to look for something to be thankful for, then we get a different choice, gives us another kind of dopamine hit, the kind that sustains. So I just want to end with being thankful actually changes your brain chemistry, changes your body. And the more you're thankful, the more you start to choose to look for things to be thankful for, the more your eyes will help you to find those things, even when it's hard, because there's always something to be thankful for.